Hi, welcome to Here to There, hosted by Carolyn Taketa, former attorney, current small groups pastor, and life coach. Through monthly conversations with pastors, authors, and guests, we hope to stir your thoughts and encourage you to move from where you are to where you want to be, in your personal life, in your leadership, or in your ministry.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on Here to There, where we explore how we move from here, our present reality, to there, the future that God has for us. So over the years, I've met people leading in small groups ministries with various types of employment arrangements in their churches. Some are full-time, some are part-time paid staff, but many are also full-time or part-time unpaid volunteers, especially in smaller churches or new church plants. Many seem to have the exact same role as a small group ministry point leader, and they might even have the title as pastor or director or something similar to that. And these folks are sometimes bivocational, and they work in marketplace jobs that pays the bills. So, actually my dad did this for a couple of decades. He had a successful full-time practice as a veterinarian. And then after he completed his MDiv through night school, he became an ordained pastor. And I remember telling him why you didn't want to do this on top of having a full-time plus job. And he just really loved doing the work of pastoring. And so he was a veterinarian by day, and then he worked as a volunteer unpaid pastor during evenings and weekends, often performing the same functions as the associate pastor on staff. And so we know that Apostle Paul was also bivocational at times and works as a tradesman, providing for his own needs and the needs of his team. So I was thinking, given the constraints on ministry budgets, especially in this pandemic year, I know that that's kind of a conversation going on in our church right now, that it's helpful to consider other staffing options for our ministries. And could someone in your church have the calling and capacity and the desire to become an unpaid bivocational small groups minister? Perhaps. So my guest today, Peter Clow, is a bivocational groups pastor, and he's familiar with the benefits and challenges of having his feet in two vocations. I was going to say foot, but there's two vocations, so you'd have to have 2 feet, and managing the tensions of both a minister role and a full-time secular job. So thank you, Peter, so much for joining us on Here to There.
Well, thank you, Carolyn. I'm glad to be here.
And so Peter lives in New Hampshire with his wife and his 3 kids. We were saying earlier that this may be the furthest point in the U.S. that I've interviewed somebody, since I'm in SoCal and he's out in New Hampshire, which I understand. Is there snow yet? I'm guessing yes.
Actually, on Halloween, it snowed just a little bit, but enough to be cold and cover the ground.
And it's so pretty when that happens, right? The first snowfall. My daughter in Boston says it's really pretty day 1, and then it's not great for 5 more months.
Yes, it was pretty, but it was also, this is way too early. I want fall to continue on. So I actually got a great picture of one side of the street was the fall colors of New England, and the other side of the street was covered with snow.
Oh, it's so nice. I know. Those pictures are so pretty. We have the unexciting weather here of 80 degrees all the time. Well, since 2014, Peter served as a discipleship pastor at Emmanuel Baptist Church, overseeing the small groups ministry, and he also serves on the senior leadership pastoral team, assisting in teaching and preaching, as well as the growth and vision of his church. Peter is an Air Force veteran who works full-time for BAE Systems, which is a leading defense and aerospace company, as a manufacturing supervisor. And Peter, you were saying you've lived all over the world with kind of the different jobs you've had.
It was mostly when I was in the military. We would do deployments from the Middle East to Guam to Hawaii. It was usually short trips, but it was definitely a taste of around the world. Japan, that was pretty cool. So a taste of the world.
Yeah, which does give you a different perspective. So since 2018, Peter's been involved with our small group network, and that's when we first met, I think, just in passing, and is currently our New Hampshire state leader. And you might also recognize his name from small group network blogs because he's part of the blogging team. So thank you for doing that as well. So let's start the conversation by defining what a bivocational pastor is. And you and I both did research on this. And we came up with 2 different conclusions, which, the wonderful world of the internet. But traditionally, a bivocational pastor used to be someone who served the church in a part-time formal role without financial compensation. Usually it was because the church was so small or so new that it couldn't afford to pay the pastor, or the pastor didn't need the money, which was a little bit of my father's case. He just declined it. But in 2018, though, I saw an article from Lifeway Leadership noting an emerging trend, and they called it that there's a growth in bivocational pastors because they wanted to do that, that they intentionally chose to stay in the marketplace and saw that God's calling was in both spheres. And so they saw their secular jobs as part of their calling. And so they wanted to make sure that they could keep that going even while ministering in the church. So Peter, for you, tell us a bit about your story. Like, which of the two versions of bivocational pastor were you?
Well, as I mentioned when we first discussed this, I never considered myself bivocational or a bivocational pastor. It kind of always grew out of a desire and a love to just want to serve God. And so I just ended up, and we can get into the story when you want to, but I just ended up to the place of where I was doing both things. And that's where I felt God was calling me. And so when I did my research of bivocational, it seemed to always point towards, getting paid in both spheres, vocation secular and vocation ministry.
I think more people would do it if they got paid in both.
Yeah.
I kind of think that that's probably less of a case. But for you, though, let's be clear, you are not paid for your work for the church. How many hours do you spend on your church ministry?
It all depends on what's going on. It could be from, I think, a large portion is obviously caring for the small groups and the small group leaders. It could be, 3-4 hours a week to more than that, depending on what's going on with people's lives and in the group. And a large portion of my time is also if I'm preparing for sermons, if I have to fill the pulpit or studies that I do. So, I mean, it could go from 10 hours a week to, 2 hours a week, depending on what's going on. But typically it's something every night that I could fill my week with if I wanted.
Mm-hmm. Right. Ministry kind of has a way of expanding in that way. So tell us, though, I do want to hear a bit about your story. So like a lot of lay leaders, you were volunteering in the church probably as a small group leader and doing other things. So where did the shift happen where you actually took on a staff title and a staff role?
So I'll go back a little bit. I won't make it too long of a story, but I came to faith in Jesus Christ at a very young age. I grew up in the church, and I made a decision for myself. I would say when I was probably 8 years old to trust Christ. But I didn't really start growing until I went in the military. And so when I went in the military, it was really where the rubber met the road, and I made a decision. I wanted to know why I believe what I believe, because I couldn't really defend it good. And so I really started seeking God in the military. The Bible was truly a mirror that showed me who I was, things I was struggling with in my life. And it was really at that time in that journey that I kind of just, gave it all to God. And I said, hey, whatever you want me to do, I'll do it. And I kind of wrote out a 1-page manifesto of my surrender to God, whatever you want me to do. And so at that point, I started serving wherever I could at that time. And at that time, it was more music. I love music. I love singing. I love leading music. And so I started doing that in the church I was at. In 2000, when I got out of the military, I came back to Emmanuel, which is the church I grew up at. And I really had the same heart. I just wanted to do whatever I could to serve God. And so from, whatever doors were open, from the nursing home ministry to the young adult group to, preaching at the local jail to, I started an addiction recovery program at a church. Whatever I could do, I wanted to get involved in. And so I did that until, I did that until 2014 when I accepted the role of discipleship pastor, which was over our small groups. And that's a story in itself, because we transitioned from a traditional model of one Sunday school that a guy taught for like 40 years to, mixed groups. And so that was a transition in itself. And so, but in 2009 was when I officially became part of the senior leadership team, if you will. My church was kind of restructuring, and instead of just having a kind of a one pastor led type church, our pastor who came on, I believe in 2004, I want to say, wanted a plurality of elders and wanted a leadership staff. And so at that time was when I kind of took that role. But it was a journey. So as I took that journey of just kind of seeking God and serving where He wanted me to, I also, when I came back from the military, took the job at BAE Systems, and there's a lot of parallels from my growth and journey at BAE Systems to my growth and journey in ministry, and they both kind of complemented each other.
Like, what are some of the parallels? That's interesting.
Well, a lot of the experience that I got from ministry, which was dealing with people, which was, compassion and just the way I handled certain matters because I had to when I was doing, specific ministries. I was able to use that experience and that knowledge and kind of the mentoring that I got from others within the church. And I was able to use that when I was started to deal with people and started to have more leadership roles within the company. So that was definitely a blessing. And also the training, especially when I went into management at BAE Systems, the training that I received from my job also helped in strategic and leadership in the church. So they kind of fed each other. And it seemed like as I grew in the leadership of the church, I grew in my position at BAE Systems. And so it kind of always followed each other.
Which is so beautiful. I love that parallel because, in your story, you're basically submitting to God, I'll do whatever. And then to have both things kind of parallel makes it easier and also just affirms the call on your life to do both.
Yeah.
Because they do track together, and people really are people. Whether you're managing people in the marketplace, you're managing them, at church, you're going to have difficult people, joyful people. You're going to have the whole assortment of hurting people. It's a lot of it is similar. So it's great that you can bring that compassion to bear in the workplace in the same way, and then bring the leadership strategic piece to bear in the church piece. So you kind of started talking about some of the advantages of having your foot in both spaces. What are some other benefits you've experienced by being bivocational? Now that we've given you this title, you can just kind of put that on.
Well, I think one of the greatest ones, which I'm sure most people would agree, is it just gives me evangelistic opportunities. So I'm able to interact with unbelievers all day, every day. It gives me kind of these relevant and fresh interactions with people, so that when it comes to ministering, whether it's in a small group capacity and encouraging small group leaders and groups to make sure outreach and evangelism is part of their daily lives, I can go to the experiences that I've had and the opportunities that God has given me at my workplace as well. So that's definitely a blessing that keeps me relevant and in touch with society. I would say also it allows me to be relevant to the people that I'm ministering to at my church. So I can have compassion with the leaders who work a 40, 50-hour week, and then have to also go to their groups and kind of prepare and have the time available to do their ministry as well. So I think it allows me to be a little more relevant to them and relatable, if you will.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think those are kind of three: the parallel in the training and experience I'm getting, the interactions with the lost, and also the being relatable to the Christians that I deal with.
Yeah, and I think you also have some preaching responsibility. So I would imagine that, when you look out at the congregation, like, the struggles because you're not in a holy staff huddle where you're primarily just interacting with other Christians. You actually know the challenges that are out there. And I think that's really helpful because it's part of the relevance that you're talking about. I think it gives credibility to your witness on both sides, right? And then do you ever find yourself, like in your secular job, that once some of those guys know that you're also a pastor, does that give you a higher level of accountability? How does that impact when they find that piece out about you?
That's a good question. I don't necessarily, blurt it out there. Hey, by the way, I'm a pastor, but
we're going to get you a shirt that says Bivocational pastor, and then people will ask.
Well, I do have one that says discipleship pastor, but I feel weird wearing it. So, but
yes.
So it does come up though in conversations, because there'll be times where I've been able to minister to my employees and obviously there's a fine line being their boss and all that, but I'm able to minister to them, and when they find out that I'm a pastor, or that I'm an ordained pastor, or that I'm heavily involved in my church, it kind of, with some people, it will open up that opportunity. And there's several times where I've had ministerial interactions, if you will, in my office with people that come in telling me about a certain situation or something they're struggling with because it has to do with their work and all that. And I'm able to witness to them and to tell them about my hope in Christ. And there's been several where I've been able to lead them to our church or our church website. We have all our sermons on and stuff. So it's definitely been a blessing there. And another thing with the relevance is when COVID happened, I was able to see kind of firsthand with the people that I work with and that are in the factory that I work with, their real anxiety and concern over COVID.
Right.
And so, while you have other Christians fighting about whether they should wear a mask or not because of their own preference, you got people that are generally concerned and anxious and fearful that need to be ministered to.
Exactly. No, that's true. Do you find on the flip side, like now, when you're in leadership meetings and doing that work in your church, do you feel like there's some more freedom because you're not being paid? I mean, in all honesty, because I remember when I first started out in small group ministry, I was working part-time and I was being paid virtually very little. And I remember being like, okay, I can just say this because what are they going to do? Fire me? Like this, it gave me more freedom to speak up when I felt like it needed to happen.
Yes. I would say not necessarily. I still feel like I can speak up whether I was paid or not, but I do feel almost at times it allows me more credibility in the sense of I'm not getting paid to do this. I'm doing this because I love Jesus and I want to follow whatever his will is for my life. So people can't hang that on me, and say, oh,
That's
you're just
true.
doing this because you're paid. And no, I'm not. I do this absolutely free. And those who may be listening who are bivocational or volunteer or whatever you want to title it, they can understand, you put a lot of hours and time into trying to, and time away from family that you have to sacrifice sometimes in order to minister. And if you're not doing that, you don't really understand kind of the sacrifice and the effort that you're putting into it. And so people are easy to criticize or easy to, say, oh, that wasn't as excellent as we thought it should have been. Well, we're doing the best we can with what we got.
Right. Which, leads to my next question, which is, so what are some challenges? Obviously, limited time. I mean, you have a family. Limited time is probably a big one, I guess. Are there some other challenges to having both feet in both camps?
But if I can just talk about that time management one real quick, is that's definitely one of the greatest, obviously, challenges, time management. But one thing I learned earlier on in my ministry is I can only do what I can do, in that I only need to do what God wants me to do. So I used to, when I was involved with the faith-based addictions recovery program that I was directing, I would get overwhelmed because there'd be so many things to do and so many things I want to do and so many people I want to meet and so many organizations I want to talk to, but I couldn't do it all without neglecting my family or without neglecting, life. So I determined that, God, whatever you want me to do today, show me whatever you want me to do, help me to get done whatever you want me to get done. And when I did that, I could, with peace, just whatever get done is what God wanted to get done. And so you kind of got to have that mindset that God knows how many hours you have in a day. God knows that you're bivocational. God knows that you volunteer, and he knows what needs to get done. And the important things are the ones that God wants you to get done, not what you feel you need to get done.
Right.
And so that's helped me a lot to be content in that aspect. Also, challenges. I think, I don't know if all bivocational ministers struggle with this, but I think I've struggled probably to be honest, for the whole 20 years of just the seeking God of whether he wants me to work full time or part time, And so
Mm-hmm.
I think that's been a constant struggle in my heart. And I know
Mm,
when God wants his will known, it will be known. Like, you don't have to try to guess it. He'll let you know.
right.
And because I've seen other areas in my life. And so in this area where I've maybe struggled or where I felt like, I could do more if I was serving full time, or, sometimes I think other full time ministers or whatever maybe
Hmm.
might think you're less of a minister because
Yes.
you're not full time. And so I think I struggle with that a little bit. And with that, I always go back to God and
Right.
and say, God, what is your will? And I let Him make it clear that I'm in His will, what I'm doing, and
Hmm.
He gives me
And
peace in
obviously,
that.
your church is at peace with the arrangement, and I think that and has affirmed that for you. So,
Yeah,
I remember struggling with that exact thing, Peter, when I was part time, and I kept saying, you guys really need like a lot more than I can give as a young mother, and this is what I only feel called right now to do this much. But gosh, there's so much that could be done
right.
in small groups if you would like invest and do this with, go get a real pastor was what I was saying. Go,
Yeah,
go find someone who really wants to do this. And they're like, no, you're exactly what we need right now. And we're not in a hurry and we can build this more slowly. And we'd rather have you at part-time than have this shift. And it was so affirming at the same time that I wrestled with, oh, is this the best thing for me? Is this the best thing for the church? And over time, it kind of got worked out where I was able to step into a full-time role once the kids are older. But it is something I think everyone that is part-time will wrestle with because
yeah,
you feel like you especially because you want to, you want to serve God fully, and you are. And it's great that I think the churches then have to decide, what they want and what they can resource. And so I feel like there's probably people in our churches that are like you, that have this desire and, and just a calling to do more than just be a voluntary small group leader, which is great. Or maybe even a coach, which I know a lot of churches have that role, and that's volunteer, and we don't call them staff. Your level of leadership is different, and I feel like there's people like that that we can deploy, especially when budgets are tight. And like our church has done this with semi-retired people where they've taken early retirement packages, or they still have a lot of gas in the tank and just love the Lord and love people, and they don't need to make money. And so we've found niches for them in areas of expertise, which has been such a joy for us. And then we get to have some wise people, older people on staff as well. But I feel like, if how do you think people find people like you? I mean, you were easy for your church because you came back to a church that already knew you,
right.
and you grew up there, and they knew everything about you. But if we were going to go, hey, I want a Peter type person in my on my team, how do we find one?
I think the key to it, and all we only have. I mean, we have our church is about 250,
Mm-hmm.
person, and our only paid pastor is our lead pastor. And so
Okay.
we have others that are in senior leadership, probably two others that don't get paid as well, and they do a volunteer. So I think the first thing is you got to find someone's passion. So I mean,
Mm,
like I was saying, I never considered myself bivocational or anything like that. I just considered, um, the Bible talks in Ephesians 4 that walk worthy of the vocation or the calling of which
mm-hmm.
you are called. And so we all have a calling, and we all have giftings that when we exercise them, it fills us with joy and with passion and
Mm,
excitement. And so I have a guy that I'm working with now who's he's my coach, probably my first coach that I've had for small groups, and he has a passion for it. Like, he loves
mm,
leading, he loves gathering people around and encouraging them. He's creative, and so I think finding someone's passion. If you find someone's passion and give them the ability to utilize that, then I mean, you just it's like anything you love, you just do it, and time flies and you just enjoy doing it. So um, also, obviously, someone who's devoted and committed, like, they
mm,
love Jesus and they want to serve whatever God would call them to do. But I also think another big one is they find their strength in God. Someone who they're they can pour their burdens on Christ, and they can be strengthened in Christ, because when you're bivocational or volunteering, obviously that's a lot of, it can be some stressful situations. There's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of juggling with time and people. And so I think being able to find your strength in God will keep you from being overwhelmed, like I mentioned earlier,
Mm-hmm.
being content and only getting done what you can get done, and trusting
Yeah.
Him in that. And then a last one, I think, is someone who is able to mentor and train others. So basically, someone who can
Mm-hmm.
gather a team, because you can't do everything yourself. And so I think
Right.
part of being bivocational for me is helping me to be able to realize, okay, I can't do this on my own. I can't get everything done that I want to get done in the time that I have. So I
Mm-hmm.
need other good people, volunteers around me that I can train and that I can utilize and have around me to kind of carry the load and the burden. And really, that's what we're all called to do, right? In the church,
It's true.
not just the paid leaders, it's the people that are the ministers sitting in the seats.
Right. Right. The paid leaders are supposed to be equipping the
Yeah.
work of the saints, which is the people, the body. So you talked about this coach that you're training up. So I think we probably all have some people like this that are kind of coach level for us, but we don't call them staff. I don't know. Do you think that's just semantics of what we call things? Or do you think there's a difference to saying, for yourself, like being the discipleship pastor
Yeah.
versus being a volunteer, leader? Is there a difference?
Yeah, I think so, because there's a different level of trust and responsibility that you
Mm,
have. Trust in that
yes.
person and responsibility level. And this coach with me happens to be, recently kind of added to our leadership staff, so it kind of works out. But yeah, there is that level of uh, someone who can be a leader and who can handle various things at once. Obviously, that's important.
Yeah, high capacity. Yeah,
High capacity, yeah.
because they're
So
juggling a full time job too. So
yes,
clearly, they have to be high capacity people.
we have two of our guys. One is he's the worship pastor. He's also the recently took over our young adult group, our singles, college, and
Mm,
career, and another guy who's ministers to our students or to our teens. Both of them
right.
basically own a business and are also volunteering in that capacity in the church, and they're on our senior leadership team as well. So our church is
You have a
kind
great
of,
model.
yeah, our
Yeah.
church is kind of developing this model that I think a lot of churches are going to have to utilize. Um,
Yes.
but again, it's going to take finding the people's passion, and they have to be dedicated to want to serve Christ for the sake of their love for Him, and obviously not necessarily wanting to get paid for it. And I never thought of even growing up. I guess the mindset I was raised with. I never thought of when I served God as like a volunteer. I just thought of it as
Mm,
serving God. And so when I first heard the word and said, "Oh well, that person is only volunteering," I guess,
yeah,
but I never thought
you're
of it that
absolutely
way.
right.
Um,
Yeah, you're right. I
is
don't
that
know why we have it like that. I mean, because biblically it's not. So
right?
yeah, you just saw it as serving. But then once you have the title, though, you're right. I think there's a higher level of accountability and higher level of trust.
I had someone who was helping me out with something a while ago in ministry, and they were kind of, I won't say slacking, but certain things that were supposed to happen never happened, and they were volunteer. But I was probably a little um, too gung ho at the time, and to me, it was like if you're going to do something for God, you want to do your best, and it's not
Right.
just a second thing. To me, it's like number one. And so I was talking to the person like, I am just a volunteer, and that's when it kind of struck me like, I guess, but I
Interesting.
never thought of it that way. I thought of it as we're serving God, and I want to do my best, but
Yeah, and I think maybe prior generations, my parents very much thought the way you do and saw it as part of their discipleship following Jesus automatically meant you served, period. I don't know that we necessarily have that mindset in this generation now. I think we kind of you are following Jesus and then you can choose to serve, right? We're always
right.
inviting people to choose to
Yeah,
serve rather than seeing serving as an automatic outgrowth of your commitment to the Lord.
right.
I think that that framework, which is more biblical, is not as prevalent as maybe it once was, which might be why it may be harder to find bivocational people. The last thing I wanted to ask is, if someone was thinking about it, say someone who's listening has been a coach or involved in the ministry, but they would like a seat at the table. They would like more leadership, more influence in their church. What would you advise them?
I would advise them, you're always safest when you're in God's will. So if God is leading in that way and he opens up an opportunity, then it's a matter of stepping out in faith. And as someone once said, I believe it's Charles Stanley, it's our responsibility to obey. It's God's responsibility to provide. So, step in and don't worry about how qualified you feel or how qualified you think you are, but understand that when God calls and he opens the door and the leadership is confirming that, step out in faith and just do it.
Yeah, that's a good word. I think we tend to second guess it a whole lot. Or if someone's wanting that and their church isn't asking yet, they may not have thought of it.
True.
And then to encourage them to have the conversation and see if that might be something God's calling you to and calling church to. And I'm guessing a lot of churches would be really happy to have a unpaid leader.
I think an important aspect of it too is your senior leadership or your lead pastor, whoever's working there full time, is if I feel like I'm overloaded and I can't get something done that I feel needs to get done, whether it's getting back to somebody or whatever, then I know I can go to him and say, hey, can you help me out with this? And he understands the dynamic of someone who's bivocational and someone who's volunteering, that they don't have all the time in the world and there is a struggle with time. So he's willing to take that up. So I think for churches, it's important that the staff understands and is there for that person if they need help.
Yeah. So they understand the restrictions for sure.
Right.
All right. Well, Peter, thank you so much. This is kind of an unusual topic that we typically don't do on Group Talk, but I know that a lot of our churches are kind of in this same similar bucket, because I've met a lot of people, and then they'll say like, oh, but I'm a volunteer. And you've heard this too from like small group network people. I'm like, no, it's the same job.
Yeah.
Depending on your church organization and structure and resources, you may or may not be paid for, you may or may not have a title, but really the role of discipling people through groups, we all are doing the same work in different contexts. So
Amen.
I love how you spoke in value to people doing that. And it is really just in responding to, in obedience to what God's calling us to. So Peter, if people want to talk to you more about this, what's the best way for people to reach you?
You can reach me at sinswashed@gmail.com. You can reach me on Facebook, Peter Clow, or Twitter, or LinkedIn. Any of those avenues, feel free to reach out to me.
Great. And Peter, of course, I mentioned earlier, is in the Small Group Network Huddle in New Hampshire and is our state leader. And I bet you might even take somebody who's in a close neighboring state, because those states are small together. So maybe once we're out of the pandemic, you can actually meet again, and you're interested in joining Peter's Huddle. Maybe, I don't know if you're doing them online during this season.
We actually met in person.
Fantastic.
A month and a half ago, we met in person, and it was great. We had someone from Massachusetts and some people from New Hampshire. So
I know. So you're willing to take Massachusetts people as well as New Hampshire.
I didn't think about it until I just said that, but yeah.
So if you're in the Northeast, in that corner of our country, get in touch with Peter. He's a great guy, and the huddle will be such an encouragement to you, especially if you're in a bivocational volunteer basis at your church. That'd be so encouraging. Yes. You can also interact with Peter on our Facebook group page and our network group page. He's on there. You can also find other resources on our website as well. So, and it actually, when this uploads onto the Facebook network page, I want to ask people if they're also bivocational and see how many of our Facebook people are, because I bet it's a pretty high percentage, and it's not a topic that we've talked about openly, but I know that there's a lot, and we really want to encourage them, because they're actually doing the harder work of doing two jobs instead of just one. So we want to be an encouragement and a resource for them as well. So thank you so much, Peter, for joining us.
It was a pleasure. It was great talking to you. And
yeah, so God bless you and God bless your ministry in both your marketplace job as well as the church. Thank you all for joining us for Here to There. Until next time, remember, we are better together.
Thank you for listening to Here to There, part of the Group Talk network of podcasts. If you like what you've heard, make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. If you want to learn more, make sure you check out smallgroupnetwork.com for more resources.